The moment the clock hit 0, the stadium didn't roar. It exhaled. A long, painful breath from thousands of people who knew exactly what they had just watched slip through their fingers. It wasn't just a loss. It was the kind of defeat that leaves you staring at the screen afterward, motionless, wondering how something so avoidable became inevitable all over again. Because the Seattle Seahawks didn't just lose to the Rams, they collapsed against them. By 2 points. 2 points that felt like the weight of a boulder crushing a season that keeps flirting with greatness but refuses to grab hold of it. From the very first snap, something felt wrong. You could almost sense the hesitation, the sluggishness, the quiet panic underneath the surface. And before anyone could settle in, the Rams were already sprinting down the field, as if the Seahawks forgot the game had started. Kyren Williams ran like he was late for a train, and Seattle's defense was nothing but a hallway he needed to sprint through. 12 carries, 91 yards, a touchdown, and somehow, 80 of those yards came before the first quarter even ended. 80. Against a defense that, on its best nights, looks good enough to carry this franchise deep into the postseason. But what happens when your defense is left out there, alone, for nearly 12 straight minutes to open the game? What happens when your offense starts like it's stuck in mud, shuffling instead of attacking, hesitating instead of striking? You get this, a slow bleed, a self-inflicted disaster disguised as a close loss. The Seahawks didn't lose because they lacked talent. They didn't lose because they were outmatched. They lost because once again, when the moment arrived, they weren't ready to meet it. Just like against the 49ers, a winnable game turned painful. Just like against the Buccaneers, a winnable game slipped away. And now the Rams, another game that sat right there waiting to be claimed, and Seattle let it drift away into the cold Los Angeles night. The worst part? This team had every chance to win. Even after the slow start, even after the crushing mistakes, even after one player's costly errors nearly buried them. When the field goal unit trotted out for the final kick, this team still had a chance to walk out with a victory. They just didn't seize it. And yes, disappointing feels like too small a word for what this game really was. But it fits. It fits because it captures the emotional punch without needing an explanation. Slow starts crushed them. Defensive exhaustion crushed them. Third downs, where Seattle kept putting themselves in impossible positions, crushed them. And the truth is brutally simple. When they committed to the run, when Charbonnet and Walker actually got momentum, when the offense finally started pushing forward instead of sideways, the chains moved. The rhythm appeared. The team looked alive. But by then, the damage had already been done. And that is why this loss stings in a way others don't. Because it was preventable. Because it was right there. Because Seattle did just enough to lose by a sliver instead of doing enough to win by a mile. This wasn't a defeat. This was an opportunity squandered. Again, if the first quarter felt like surviving a storm, the second act of this game felt like trying to climb out of the rubble afterward. Every drive began with hope and ended with frustration. And every time the Seahawks lined up on third down early in the game, that hope shrank smaller and smaller. Because Seattle wasn't just failing on third down, they were building their own obstacles, one wasted play at a time. 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 11. Drive after drive, the Seahawks weren't setting themselves up to succeed. They were daring themselves to fail. But here's the twisted part. The running backs weren't the issue. Far from it. Kenneth Walker ran like a man trying to pull the offense out of quicksand. Every time he touched the ball, it felt like a breath of relief. Quick cuts, explosive bursts, outside runs that stretched the defense, and tough yards between the tackles. Over 4 yards a carry. A number that might not turn heads on a scoreboard, but on a night like this, it was everything. Then there was Zach Charbonnet, the hammer to Walker's lightning. His yards didn't come easy. They came with violence. Bodies colliding, piles pushing, legs churning through arms and helmets and resistance. His average wasn't flashy, but his runs mattered. He earned every inch the hard way, and Seattle needed that grit desperately. When those two were fed the ball, something opened up. The offense breathed. The drives stabilized. The chains moved. But that didn't fix the real problem. Because the real problem was waiting behind center. And when you strip away the noise, the pain, the excuses, and the frustration, it all leads to one truth. Seattle lost this game because their quarterback imploded. Sam Darnold didn't just have a bad day, he unraveled. 4 interceptions, 0 touchdowns. But the turnovers weren't just numbers. They were moments. Each one a gut punch that shifted the momentum, drowned the energy, and cracked whatever confidence the offense still had left. Some of the throws looked rushed, yes. The pass rush closed in fast. The pocket collapsed at the worst times. But the decisions were something else entirely. The forced ball to Cooper Kupp while he was blanketed. A throw that looked doomed the moment it left Darnold's hand. The pass toward Elijah Royal that hung in the air long enough for the safety to read it like a children's book. A turnover waiting to happen. Even the interceptions that were partially caused by pressure still felt like desperation rather than discipline. Darnold was playing like someone trying to erase his mistake with a miracle, instead of owning the moment and taking the safe option. And that's what stung the most. Not the yardage, not the completion percentage, but the decisions, choices that tore the heart out of drives and handed the Rams life they didn't earn. Seattle's defense was giving them chances. The run game was giving them balance. The receivers were creating windows, but the quarterback was giving the ball to the wrong team. By the time the Seahawks settled down, by the time the offense began to find a rhythm, the damage was already woven into the fabric of the night. This wasn't just a loss. It was a slow-motion unraveling, one bad decision at a time. And now, the Seahawks walk away knowing exactly where the blame points. Not at the defense. Not at the running backs. Not at the play calling. But at the one position they needed most, and the player who fell apart when the moment demanded composure. As the game dragged into the later quarters, something strange happened. Something that made the loss hurt even more. The Seahawks weren't fading, they were surging. The offense, for the first time all afternoon, began to look like the offense everyone expected from the start. The rhythm returned. The pace quickened. The runners hit the line with purpose. The receivers found space. The line held. And for a brief, beautiful stretch, Seattle looked like the team that should have buried the Rams early. 414 total yards don't appear out of thin air. That's the output of an offense that had the firepower to win this game and should have. And yet, in the shadows of those numbers sits the truth that turned this game into a tragedy. Seattle's comeback attempt wasn't undone by play calling. It wasn't undone by the run game. It wasn't undone by the receivers or the line or the coaching. It was undone by the turnovers. One after another, like stones tied to the ankles of a team trying to climb out of deep water. For interceptions. For short fields gifted to the Rams. For punches to the gut of a defense that was playing with every ounce of pride they had. And the cruelest part? Even with all that weight, the Seahawks were still right there. 2 points behind, 1 drive away, 1 single kick away from flipping the script on a game they had no business being in. It speaks to the heart of this defense, the fire, the fight, the absolute refusal to break. By the end of the first quarter, the Rams had squeezed out almost every rushing yard they would get all day. 80 in the opening period. Then, just 39 the rest of the way. Seattle slammed the door shut and welded it closed. Matthew Stafford, who had spent the last few weeks carving teams apart like a surgeon with a grudge, suddenly looked human. Frazzled, rushed, hesitant. Seattle didn't always get him on the ground, but they were in his face, in his lane, in his head. And at the center of it all was Uchenna Nwosu, a man playing like he was wired into the stadium lights themselves. Relentless, explosive, everywhere. If you watched only him the entire game, you would have sworn Seattle was winning by 20. Players like him don't just make plays, they drag their teammates into the fight with them. That's why the ending cuts so deep. Because when you look at the scoreboard, 21-19, you see a team that survived 4 turnovers, shut down one of the NFL's most dangerous offenses, controlled the pace late, and managed to claw its way back into striking distance despite every roadblock imaginable. Most teams crumble under 2 turnovers. Most get blown out with 3. Seattle gave away 4, and still forced the Rams to sweat. It is one of the clearest, most painful signs of what this roster truly is. A Super Bowl-caliber defense paired with an offense that rises or collapses based on one man's decisions. This time, that man buried them. And as the players marched back to the locker room, the weight of what slipped away hung in the air like fog, because this wasn't just a game they could have won. It was a game that could have changed the shape of their season. A win would have meant sole control of the NFC West. A win might have even put them atop the entire conference by night's end. A win would have justified every ounce of optimism circling this team. Instead, a gut punch, a wasted opportunity, a reminder that the margin for error in the NFL is razor thin, and Seattle cut itself on it over and over. Somewhere in the facility, the defensive coaches will rewatch the film and feel their blood pressure spike. They did their part, more than their part. They adjusted, attacked, and dismantled a Sean McVay offense that usually slices through defenses like butter. And the offense, outside of those fatal throws, did enough too. The runners delivered. The receivers delivered. The line delivered. But the quarterback did not. And that's why this defeat lingers. Because it wasn't the Rams who took the game. Seattle gave it away. Now, the Seahawks face a new challenge. Not just fixing mistakes, but hoping the injury to Gray Zabel isn't as devastating as it looked. He has been the stabilizing force, the silent backbone of so many defensive packages. Losing him would be a wound that goes far deeper than this single loss. So what's the grade for a game like this? If you look at the team as a whole, probably somewhere around a B-. A tough, gritty B-. But if you isolate the player who derailed everything, it's an F. A loud, unmistakable, painful F. Because sometimes one player really can swing the outcome of an entire NFL battle. And today, that swing knocked Seattle flat. And that is what makes this defeat feel so heavy. A game they should have won. A moment they should have seized. A conference they could have led. All of it slipped away, not because they weren't good enough, but because they refused to protect the chances they earned.